So there's some structural problem with our economy, right? It's separating labor and capital in a way that it doesn't allow a family to be healthy. And so that's why Chesterton's famous quote about the state of society is he said, the problem with capitalism as a state of society, as a condition historically, I'm not talking about an idea of values or anything. So the actual name of the society itself, the concrete condition. He said the problem with capitalism in that sense is there's not enough capitalists. So there's too few, and so power's concentrated and expropriated from families. Yeah. And so then that's the first enemy. So I said there's three enemies to a distributivist. The first one is what some people might just call like big business. When more broadly, I think it would be like the market system, right? The market system itself has structural problems that create these sort of proclivities to distortion and corruption. And that's what we see in history. That's what we've seen in history in the modern era. Now, obviously, there's regulations and other things that pop back, but that's an inevitability given what capitalism is, what it does, right? It produces the need to protect the family and human dignity. And so then the socialists come back and say, well, I'll protect that. Of course, they have a further solution and often utopian ideas, right? And so that's a problem. So there's like this back and forth. So the first problem is big business or the market system, which Chesterton called Gudge. Okay. And then the other one is what we might call like the liberal state or the modern state, sort of the political form that's been dominant since 1648, the Peace of Westphalia. And so that political form, it forms what we might call, people call it the liberal order. So it forms that. And so that Chesterton called Hudge. So you've got the liberal order and you've got the market system, Hudge and Gudge. And he said they're always in bed with each other. They always help and abet each other. Their existence in history depends on each other. And so that's the enemy. Now there's a third one that more recent distributist thinkers brought out that I really like, and I add it to my framework. But I see it in Belloc's Crisis of Civilization, which is a book he wrote about sort of the history of man, right? And the church in the modern era, all the way, or pre-modern to modern era. And then in Chesterton's works too. So, and that's what these, I can't remember the guy who wrote it, but it was maybe on the Distributist Review, which is a current like periodical. And he called it Sludge, which would be what Pope Francis calls the Technocratic Paradigm. So technopoly. So these sort of the way in which machines and techniques and technology, basically man trying to control things, the way in which he controls his destiny, that has come to dominate the modern era. So that's Sludge. And I actually think that this is my view, this isn't necessarily in the distributist framework, but that's more basic, I think, than the other two. Yeah.
There you go. Distributist Review, Tilling Fertile Soil.
Cool. Yeah.
John
no, that's
Dijak.
it. And there's an article about, I think it's on there about Sludge, this third character. So Hudge, Gudge, and Sludge, those are the enemies.
So Sludge again is what?
The Technocratic Paradigm. Pope Francis in Laudato Si talks about this in chapter 3, I believe. And it's a view about, he says it's an epistemological paradigm.
Okay.
And roughly that would be what we would know it more of sort of scientism. But then not only scientism in terms of a sort of theory about let's define scientism. I define it as, following teachers I had, it's a view that the paradigm of truth and rationality is science.
Right.
And so that if it's not scientific, then it's either not true or rational, or it's like kind of quasi-rational and quasi-true. It's not really true and rational. So it includes that, but it includes what Pope Francis talks about, and this is so important, is that science itself, the practice of science, has been wedded to tools and machines and technologies and organizations such that now we have a single thing. He called it technoscience. And so that to me follows one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the philosophy of technology. Heidegger wrote a famous essay called The Question Concerning Technology. And he talks about that penetration of the knowledge to make things and the knowledge of reality by which we discover things. So theoretical knowledge, where we receive knowledge from God or from reality, that's one form of knowledge that we receive. And then we have productive knowledge by which we make things. And it basically, those two allied. And so now there's only one knowledge, the knowledge that we make. So we make things and we make the knowledge that we make. So now everything's in our control. What we know, how we know, and what we do with it. And so now to me, that's destroys the openness to transcendence, which to me is the essence of philosophy. Openness to transcendent insight from above, right? Coming through nature, creation, coming from God. And if everything's under our control. So think about it this way. Maybe I can illustrate this way. Lewis wrote a book, Abolition of Man. Have you read that one? Yeah. So in that he talks about the second chapter talks about a set of characters he calls the innovators. And the third chapter talks about a set of characters he calls the conditioners. And the conditioners want to make human nature the way they want to, according to their desires, their plans, right? Their schemes. And so this would be like the transhumanists, obviously, that we have today that are real. This isn't sci-fi. And so they're trying to make reality what they want it to be. So that's the essence to me of the technocratic paradigm. Make reality or make our world what we want it to be. And that's why I think that at the root, it's a satanic enterprise. Satan does that. Satan doesn't want God's world, so he's going to make his own world, right? And when I say world, obviously I don't mean like the material. I mean like a social
reality.
World. Yeah, our social world, our reality, right? That we have, that we mediate to each other through our language, through our symbols, through our things we operate with, right? It's that social reality is created by us.
So I'm thinking of the Apple Vision Pro that people are now strapping on their heads, and they're entering into this sort of matrix where they're being fed information from big tech, and they're engaging with that, and that would distort one's reality.
Absolutely.
Would that be an example of this?
I think that's an example, but I think that think about, here's an example that I bring up in class, is there was a missionary, his name was Jim Elliot. So when I was evangelical, he was like one of the kind of saints of the evangelical world. And I think he went to South America somewhere, and he was working with tribes, and he, incredible person. And his wife was an incredible person too. I think her name was Elizabeth, if I remember right. And he eventually got killed by one of these tribes. And the moment in which he got killed is he had a photograph, and he showed a tribesperson this photograph, and they thought he was like a demon, like a shaman, because he like trapped a person inside this thing. So they didn't know what a photograph was. And so they thought he was evil, and so they killed him because they were afraid of him, that he would like trap them in this thing, right? And so those people had no concept of a photograph. And so that a photograph's not in their social world. So my point is the things that we interact with in the language that we have creates expectations for what's real, what we encounter. It's our whole linguistic framework. All the words and vocabulary we have give us certain access to things in reality that we wouldn't have if we didn't have those concepts and those words, right? Like 100 years ago, we didn't have the word throuple, which now we have some use for that because people want marriages to be between three people, just one marriage with three people. So we invented a word. Or wed lease. We don't want to have wedlock, right? We want to get married for 5 years in which the contract will automatically dissolve. Let's call that wed lease. So those people 100 years ago didn't see those things because they didn't have words or concepts for those things. Now, why didn't they have words for or concepts for that things is an interesting question about what concepts are and what words are and what it does. So words are tools.
Yes.
Right? And so they're tools for interacting with the world. They're like the mediators between us and the world.
And they convey concepts, which are intellectual abstractions.
Yes. And then that abstraction, of course, what we're trying to approach as I would say, traditional philosophers, is the transcendent good, true, and beautiful.
Right. They have to be in accord with reality.
Yes.
Yeah. So like transgenderism would be another example of a non-thing that we've come up with a word for.
And now we're actually manipulating our bodies with technologies of various sorts, incredible amounts of knowledge we have about how physical reality works.
To make them conform with this demonic reality.
Yes. So Chesterton said the problem with the modern era is we're trying to make reality conform to our soul rather than let our soul conform to reality. It's backwards.
Yeah. So
that's the technocratic paradigm. And of course, Pope Francis, what he's seeing in that encyclical is if we follow out this satanic paradigm, then we have a massive crisis on hands. Now, we don't have to go leftist, environmental, political on this, but clearly everybody has a stake in the health of this planet, right? And we all have many stories, whether we're right wing or left wing leaning, right? That this industry destroyed this place here, right? Or this company utterly annihilated this people group, and now they're different, right? And it's like, well, that's the technocratic paradigm at work. It's controlling things, right, for the sake of some other end. Right. And so it will treat nature or creation as stuff that has no value. It's just stuff to manipulate. See? So that is the technocratic paradigm. It looks at nature, and this is what Lewis says back to that in that chapter, is that chapter 3 is that we start looking at nature as what is manipulatable by us.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.